also in a new location for this one. I'm at my mom's cousin's house, but that's okay. I decided to do a video on, I got some notes here. I printed it really big for some reason. But, this video is about, as you can probably tell by the title, like acronyms and words and stuff you'll need to know if you're just starting out in the aquarium hobby. And, it's just things that people kind of use second nature, and a lot of people don't know what they are. So it's about that. And a lot of them can mean like multiple things too. It just depends on context, so that can get confusing. This started out just to be acronyms, but it kind of devolved from there. I got this idea from a Vibes live stream. I think it was number 153. I hope I'm not stealing anybody's idea. I was just kind of passively listening to it. And I was like, hey, I should do a video about fish acronyms. So hopefully they weren't talking about doing that. But if they were, hopefully theirs comes out first. So, and I know my aquarium box. That's right. I think that's right. It was the they did like mystery boxes whenever those things were real big for a while, like a fish one. I don't think they do it anymore, but I know they did one on this. But this one is 9 pages of pure words, I guess. The first one is BBS. That stands for baby brine shrimp, which is a live food. I'm probably not going to be looking at the camera for this. I'm going to be reading my words. So BBS, baby brine shrimp. It's a live food. It's used in saltwater too. Good for small fish and big fish alike. MTS, Malaysian trumpet snail. That's a type of snail. MTS, multiple tank syndrome. That's whenever you get a whole bunch of aquariums. LFS is a local fish store. It's not used for like PetSmart, Petco's chains. It's like, like a family operated type of deal. HOB is a hang on the pack filter. CPD is celestial pearl danio, which is a type of fish, also called the galaxy rasbora. PFS is pool filter sand. It's it's pool filter sand. People use it as for the bottoms of the aquarium. It's just a sand that you put on the bottom, and it's cheaper than like aquarium sand. And that one is white in color. BDBS is black diamond blasting sand. Sometimes people just call it blasting sand or coal slag sometimes too, because that's what it is, I think. But not like pool filter sand, cheap, all that stuff. But this one's black, and it's really not black. It's more of kind of like a grayish almost, kind of some bronzes and reds in there sometimes. So yeah, UGF or UG can mean under gravel filter, which is a filter that goes under the gravel. And UG, just UG, can also be a plant. It's a carnivorous plant, and it's like Eugrophilus gramifolia or something like that. I don't know. Nobody knows how to say it, so most of the time it's just called UG. AR is also a plant. Its name is I can't think of it right now. It's like I can't think of it. I didn't write that one down. I just thought of it, but that's also a plant. AR, if someone says like AR, it is a plant in the context of aquariums. BN stands for bristlenose pleco, which it's the one with like the whiskers, and they'll clean algae and stuff, kind of. SAE is a Siamese algae eater. It's a type of fish. BBA is black-bearded algae. ACO is aquarium co-op, which is a popular store business. OTOs, OTO is autosynclus catfish. It's It's kind of like a bristlenose, but smaller. Not really, but you know, they eat algae too, but smaller. Basically, for beginners, that's pretty much all you need to know. Little algae eating guy. They can be kind of hard to keep, but that is what it is. Polyfill is a brand of filter floss sold at Walmart for generally like crafts, like sewing. Like if you're making a pillow or something, you can put that stuff in it, and yeah, it works for aquariums too, for you know, taking out fine particles and whatnot. This is all the water parameters you'll need to know ish. Ammonia, that one's real bad. Nitrite is pretty bad, and nitrate is not so bad. Those are the things you will hear about whenever people talk about cycling your tank, which we'll get into that later. Temp, T-E-M-P, stands for the temperature. Pretty easy there. TDS is total dissolved solids. It's pretty much all the junk in your water. It's really not that important, but some people like to use it. GH is general hardness. That's like basically the calcium and magnesium and some other stuff, but mostly those two. Or manganese? I think it's magnesium. I'm not really sure. KH, also sometimes called carbonate hardness, and alkalinity, like total alkalinity. That's also tied to KH pretty well. You could honestly think about those as one and the same and be fine. It's slightly different, but it's basically the same. You could think of it as like money in the bank almost. I think the aquarium co-op guy does this example often. But whenever your fish poops or whatever, you know, the bacteria makes the water slightly more acidic, and the KH is like, oh, don't worry, pH, I'll just take that and throw it away. And the pH, that's not really what this video is about. It's just more what the words mean, but I guess I'll devolve sometimes too. pH is how acidic or basic your water is. Generally, we want to kind of keep it in the 6 to 8 range for most aquarium fish. Some like it higher and stuff, but nothing to really worry about. Cory means Corydoras, or it could also mean the owner of Aquarium Co-op too, I guess. Yeah. All-in-one. Generally, people say all-in-one, like an all-in-one fertilizer. That's what they're talking about. It's a water column fertilization, like it's a liquid, and you can just like squirt it in. It's good for like stem plants and floating plants and that type of stuff. Dry ferts is powdered fertilizer. It's pretty much the individuals of the all-in-one, but not all-in-one. You know, it's just the singulars, and they're dry, you know, like a powder. Micros and macros having to do with fertilizer is the micros are going to be generally, whenever people say macros, they're talking about nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And micros, there's a lot of them. You really don't need to worry about that if you're a beginner. EI is a dosing method developed by Tom Barr, generally used with dry fertilizer. It's just like, you know, basically it'd be like equivalent to like the mix of your all-in-one, like how many of whatever you're putting in. You could think of it like that. And PPS Pro is just another dosing method. EI, its thing is it doses the fertilizers really heavy, and PPS Pro doses them very lean. So, you know, there's very little fertilizer versus a whole lot. And those are the two main kind of categories. You know, there's others, but those are the ones that really took off. And I don't do either of those, but that's neither here nor there. SP generally will stand for species. And It can also be used kind of like for like catch locations, which is just wherever they caught the fish. Sometimes, a lot of the times, if they're not, like they don't know what it is, they'll be like whatever, I'll do one I can say. Chilatharina species lake next to my house. That's where I caught it. I caught it out of the lake next to my house, and I'm pretty sure it's a Chilatharina, so that's what I'm calling it. Or like a Lowigia. And, that would be an example of like a specific catch location, the creek next to my house. And sometimes it can be like really broad for no real, no real reason, I guess, so other people don't go there and take it. Like Lowigia Mato Grasso, species Mato Grasso would be one. And that's like a whole like region of Brazil. It'd be like, I think it's like the equivalent of a state in the United States. So that's like, and it's like the third largest one. So it's like really a really big area. That's like, hey, I got this Logia from there. So yeah, and it doesn't have to be for only things we don't know. It can also be for, Bosemani rainbow fish have a lot, because sometimes the fish from each location can look a little different, or maybe it's smaller or bigger, whatever. An example of that would be Melanitania bosemani Aves Creek. That's one. I'm pretty sure that's a bosemani. Yeah. Whenever people talk about substrate, that's just like the sand or gravel or nothing or whatever you have at the bottom of your aquarium. So that's just, substrate is the bottom. So like, yeah, it's whatever's at the bottom of your tank. So whenever people talk about nutrient-rich substrates, aqua soil, and plant substrates, what they're talking about is basically like a soil type of thing. It's generally like a baked clay type of thing that has a lot of nutrients, or sometimes it doesn't and it can collect, but we're just going to say they have a lot of nutrients that the plants can use. So yeah, ppm stands for parts per million. That's just probably the most common unit of measurement we use in the aquarium hobby. There's others too, but that's the main one really. L numbers and CW numbers. I couldn't think of any fish that have kind of like a numbering system like this. So yeah, the L numbers are the plecos. Sometimes people will call them like L number fish, or CW, whatever. Those are plecos, which are like they're plecos. They're a type of catfish. And CW are corridoras, or cories, as some people like to say, which are now not all cories, but that's a discussion for another day. QT stands for quarantine, or sometimes a quarantine tank, which, that's whenever, like, if you get a new fish, you want to quarantine them, like during COVID, whenever you came back from a different country, you had to quarantine for a period of time. You had to be all by yourself, and then you could be released in the general population again. So yeah, that's QT, quarantine. TC stands for tissue culture. That's like lab-grown plants, basically. They don't have like basically anything on them. You could think about it. So there's going to be no snails and stuff. So TC is tissue culture. There's pros and cons to them. I don't really like them, but if you're scared of everything, TC plants are for you. BB stands for beneficial bacteria, or BB could also stand for bare bottom, and that's whenever you have no substrate in your tank. So your substrate is just the glass, and that makes it easier to clean, and you can look in from the bottom if you want to, which can be kind of nice for spotting like coolie loaches and stuff. The cycle, or the nitrogen cycle, as some people like to say, is complicated, and there's a lot of them, but generally whenever people say, have you cycled your tank or nitrogen cycled, they're talking about has beneficial bacteria colonized in your tank to an extent that it can turn the amount of waste that your fish are producing in a timely manner from ammonia into nitrite and finally into nitrate. I think that would be the best way I can describe it off right now. WT stands for water change, and that's, I'll talk a little bit more about that later, I'm pretty sure. I don't want to get messed up. STT, or established, like if they say, is your tank established? They're the same thing. STT, essentially, STT is coined by Aquarium Co-op in a live stream as a joke, but it kind of took off. And it stands for season tank time. And that's essentially like how long has your tank been set up in the way it is now. So like if your tank's been set up for 10 years, but you changed it 10 times, your STT, or it wouldn't be established for 10 years, it'd be established. Let's say you change it every year, it'd be established for 1 year. So, yeah. AC is activated carbon. That's can be used to pull all sorts of junk out of your water. It's not really necessary most of the time, but that's, again, a discussion for another day. GPH, gallons per hour, that's generally a measurement of filters or pumps or anything, and that's how many gallons of water or whatever thing you're moving through them, really. They're moving per hour. Yeah. PAR stands for photosynthetic active radiation. It's generally what complainy plants like to use for plants, like measuring like how bright your light is for your plant. It's one of the more useful measurements for aquariums and lighting for plants. So yeah, that's PAR is photosynthetic active radiation. You could pretty much think of that as how bright your light is and be fine. RODI, or RO, stands for, the RODI is reverse osmosis deionized, I think. Some about ionization, and D, yeah, and RO is just reverse osmosis. Most people are just going to say RO, and that's pretty much a machine that takes all the junk out of your water. It's used a lot in saltwater or like really high-end planted tanks where people are scared of everything. An active substrate versus non-active, or sometimes called inert. Non-active and inert are the same thing. Active, basically, that changes your water parameters somehow. Some rocks can do that too, although generally people don't call those active rocks, but whatever. You might hear the term live rock, and don't get that confused. Live rock is a rock that has beneficial bacteria in it. Like every rock ever can do that, so it's not a special type of rock, although generally it is a special type of rock. But I probably confused a lot of you, but that's okay. Active substrates are generally going to consist of your aqua soils and stuff like that. Dirt would be an active soil. Non-active soils are going to be sand, gravel, large rocks, tile, bare bottom, marbles, I guess, if you want to do that. Other things, anything that doesn't change up your water parameters or stuff like that. Tannins are in botanicals, kind of the same thing. You could think of them as the same thing and pretty much be fine. Tannins will make the water kind of like a brown color, and they'll also change pH, and they'll do other stuff. You don't really need to worry about it. And botanicals release tannins. So like a piece of wood would do that. An acorn. Basically anything brown. Honestly. Yeah. Cleanup crew are the fish or inverts or whatever in your tank that eat poop, algae, and just kind of clean the place up. Generally, that's going to consist of various types of catfish, bottom feeders, all the bottom feeders pretty much. People might call a cleanup crew, like loaches, catfish, geophagus even, really. Yeah. And also things like shrimp, snails, copepods even, honestly. And also things that'll eat like algae, like those bristlenose and autosynclus and various other things. I just mentioned those because we already talked about them. Yeah, that's a cleanup crew, basically. They kind of help clean up your tank. Sometimes whenever people say that, they mean like just algae cleaners, basically. But sometimes people mean like things that kind of break down waste more and stuff like that, and will kind of like stir up the bottom of the substrate to help the filters take it out. Sometimes people mean that. It just depends. Use context clues here. Cyana is cyanobacteria, blue-green algae. It's a pain to get rid of. It smells really bad. It grows generally pretty fast. It sticks to stuff, and you can use like antibiotics and some other things too to get rid of it. I haven't had success with blackouts with it, but that's fine. And up next, blackout, and that just basically means turning off your lights for a period of time. Some people also wrap a blanket or something around it so absolutely no light gets in, and that's probably the best. Well, the most true to term way to do it. I'm not a fan of blackouts personally, but sometimes they can help, especially if you don't have any plants or real sensitive things in your tank. It can help fight algae and stuff sometimes, but generally there's better ways of fighting algae, but that's okay. Wi-Fi or a regular timer analog. Generally whenever people talk about that, they're talking about a timer essentially that will turn off a plug like your lights or your filter if you want to do that for some reason, and turn it back on later. So like all my lights are on timers, various timers, to turn them on at 10 o'clock and off at I think 6 o'clock. So all my lights would be on timers, and timers help keep everything running smoothly, I guess you could say. Here I have all the fertilizer acronyms, and it looks like I was talking about the dry fertilizer stuff there. That's not really important for beginners, but KNO3, K2SO4, a lot of times they'll be for the micros. They'll just say like micro mixes. You can mix your own micros. I'm getting into that some, and yeah, I don't know why I had that on there. It's not really important for beginners. Crash, or my tank crashed or something like that, means the cycle that we talked about earlier is messed up in some way. Either all your bacteria died because you put a medication in that killed them, or you put way too much food in and the beneficial bacteria are still there, but there's not enough of them to process the waste in a timely manner. Or, it could be a lot of things. A lot of the times people don't cycle whenever they do we'll talk about that coming up soon, actually. But crash is whenever your cycle is no longer cycling, basically. You can think about it. Reseal, some people might say, like, I'm resealing my tank, or I need to reseal this tank. So basically, aquariums have one bead of silicone that the glass meets up like this, and in that corner area there's silicone, and then also on the front, so like along here and here, there's silicone that will kind of be in like an L shape and flat, that actually seals the tank so water doesn't leak out everywhere. And whenever someone says they're resealing a tank, they means they're cutting off that L piece of silicone here, right here, and they're replacing it with new. Yeah. I'll talk about this while my mind's on it. Breaking down a tank, that could mean removing the silicone that's actually holding the two glass pieces together. That's the one that runs here, and they meet up like that. That could mean doing that. Or that could also mean just like taking the fish and plants and stuff out and putting the silicone in, or not the silicone, putting the fish tank in a closet or something for a while. You just have to use your context clues to figure that out. So, yeah. Planted tanks and fully planted tanks are... A planted tank would be an aquarium with some live aquatic plants in them, generally aquatic plants in them. And a fully planted tank would be one with a whole lot in them. Okay. Here I wrote aquariums with terrestrial plants with the roots dipping in. Yeah, you could have a planted tank which is like terrestrial plants, but you just dip the roots in. Like some people do that with like potatoes and stuff for some reason. I'd want a prettier plant than a potato to do that, like maybe some pothos or something, but people are going to be people. Hobby, that's referring to the hobby of keeping aquariums. You might hear like, when did you join the hobby? Or I'm a hobbyist. That'd mean, I enjoy aquariums in this context. Aquascape or scape is, they have aquascaping contests, and which are kind of lame in my opinion, because it's like you're ranking art, and like how you rank a piece of art. Like, I think that's kind of lame. Like, I need more Oliver Knott and his Moss Man in my life, but not, the same picture of a fake underwater cave I've seen 150 times, but, that's whatever. Yeah, honestly, generally nowadays, aquascape, whenever people say like, oh, I have an aquascape, or here's my scape, they're basically just talking about like what their tank looks like. If they call it an aquascape, it might just be like a semi-nice looking planted tank. Honestly, a lot of the times that's what they're going to be referring to. And if they're referring to the competition one, they'll generally refer to it as a competition aquascape. So, yeah, that's one of those words that have kind of been watered down over time. But yeah, that's what it is. The various live foods. Okay. I guess I'm talking like, maybe like some people might say like Vin eels, or like Vin eels. They'll talk about vinegar eels. They're like a little nematode thing that floats around in vinegar, and you can feed them to, they're very small generally. There's different species, some are bigger, some are smaller, but as a hobby we think of them are very small, even though some of them are not, but that's okay. They're good for like fry and stuff that like to eat from the top. Microworms are basically the same thing. You can think about it as, honestly, they like to live different some-ish, but not all the time, and they sink basically like the same thing, but they sink to the bottom. There's also banana worms and water worms and probably some other types that I can't think of right now that are basically the same thing as micro worms but at a different size. There's a lot of live foods. I don't know why I wrote that down, because as a beginner you do not need to know about that. But you do need to know about this, even though you don't. Aerobic, anoxic, and anaerobic bacteria. Aerobic is what most people are talking about whenever they say, is your tank cycled? They're asking, do you have enough aerobic bacteria to whatever the heck I said a cycled tank was earlier. Anoxic and anaerobic, I'm just going to say they do other things too. They convert nitrate into nitrogen gas, which doesn't dissolve well in water and then escapes your aquarium. And some people like to call that a complete cycle, but I'm not here to argue that. Aerobic, that means the bacteria has a whole lot of oxygen relatively. Anoxic means it has a little bit, and anaerobic means there's like none. Father fish method, some people are just going to talk about deep substrates, which is like 6, 8, 10, whatever you want it to be, inches of sand, and that will produce anoxic filtration for the most part. Anaerobic filtration for the most part. There'd be some anoxic in there as well, but whatever. Yeah, so that's what a deep substrate would be. And the father fish method is, I just wrote loser stuff. And for Dr. Kevin Novak, I wrote loser stuff but less successful. I think I wrote this list at like 3 a.m. I guess I was feeling a little spicy then. The father fish method, it's some people, whenever they say that, they're just talking about a deep substrate, or they're just talking about a dirted tank. So don't, and in fact, like 90% of the people that say father fish method are talking about one of those two things. But I can't believe I wrote that. That's, I don't disagree, but whatever. But really what the father fish method is, it's both. His dirted tanks have dirt and a whole bunch of other crap that help it last longer, essentially. And it's also very deep to have that anoxic or anaerobic filtration going on, and anoxic too, honestly. But generally, if you hear someone say, I'm doing a father fish method tank, a lot of the times they're just going to be talking about a standard dirted tank, which would be honestly like a Wallstad tank. Diana Wallstad, she wrote a book on keeping aquariums at one point, and yeah, she used dirt and not very many fish, and she didn't do water changes, was essentially the, her claim to fame or whatever. So, but my point was, a lot of the times whenever people are saying they're doing a father fish tank, a lot of the times they'd really be doing it like a Wallstad tank, and it just kind of gets lost in translation because people don't like to watch the whole video. But whatever. Plenums are kind of Dr. Kevin Novak's claim to fame, I guess you could say. What it is, it's an area under your substrate that is, the water moves very, very slowly in, which produces an anaerobic environment. And that, I think, like I said earlier, it essentially does the same thing as a deep substrate, just differently. Like, it's competing to do the same thing, essentially. Yeah, that's Dr. Kevin Novak's thing. What it is essentially, generally, it's an undergravel filter with really short uplift tubes, which is what I'm trying to explain this in the simplest way I can without thinking about how to explain it simply. But it's an undergravel filter that doesn't move very much water. There you go. That's what a plenum is. He also uses other stuff in it a lot of the times, but that's really not what this is about. LFC stands for Local Fish Club sometimes. Actually, I think it does all the time. A club, like an aquarium club, a lot of the times people like to be fancy with it and call it stupid stuff, like an aquarium society or sometimes association, a big old meeting, whatever they want to call it. It's all the same thing, really. It's a local fish club. A lot of the times, local fish clubs will have auctions or swaps. An auction is an auction, like you're buying a car, like at an auction. It's like $1, $2, that type of thing. And a swap, really, a lot of the times you're swapping money. It's like a big old store event, essentially. Like you're swapping money for fish or plants or an aquarium or whatever. You can also do trading, like what I think of as a swap, but a lot of the times you're just selling stuff or buying stuff, to be honest. AGA, IBC, ACA, ALA, AKA, and others out. Oh, these are like some of the big nationwide clubs. The AGA is the Aquatic Gardeners Association. They do aquatic gardening, so like aquatic plants. They're the big aquatic plant group, and I believe they're international, but I'm not entirely sure. IBC stands for the International Betta Congress. They have to be fancy. I like to call them the Betta Boys. I think that should take off. I think that's a great name for them. The ACA is the American Cichlid Association. They like cichlids. New World, African, New World, Old World, big, small, doesn't matter. They like cichlids. Probably mostly African cichlids, to be honest. I've never gone to one of the meetings, but I also don't really like cichlids, so I don't want to go. The ALA is the American Live Bear Association. I think they're an association. They like live bears, guppies, mollies, not tetras. Guppies, mollies, platies, swordtails, a whole lot of other things, honestly. There's a lot of live bears. Least killifish would be one, and that's not a killifish. So if you go to the AKA with some least killifish, they're going to be mad. You know why? Because that's the American Killifish Association. I'm pretty sure. American Killifish. They're the killifish guys. AKA, it's the killifish guys. There's others too, but I can't think of any right now. The Triple Crown, I might be wrong on the clubs on this, to be honest. But I think it's an event they put on often, and it might be different clubs. I'm not really entirely sure, but it's one of the larger events, and there's a lot of other events, but this is the only one I wrote down. And people talk a lot about it a lot, and it's not really clear what it is to me. Triple Crown is a Chinese dish, but to some aquarists, it's the meeting of the American Cichlid Association, the American Killifish Association, and the American Live Bear Association. Pretty sure those are the clubs that do it. I think it's an annual thing. I'm pretty sure they do it every year. A lot of these things, like I know the International Betta Congress has one. There's one of like the judges in the town I live in. Can't think of his name right now, but yeah. Yeah, and pretty much all the big clubs have their own event, but Triple Crown, they call it Triple Crown because it's, like the 3 groups meeting, I guess. I think they should probably call it something else because I don't think that's very intuitive. So that's why I put it on the list. Wild caught is a fish caught out of the wild. I'm not going to talk about the meetings anymore, I don't think. Wild caught is a fish caught out of the wild. Speaking of wild caught, some people might say my fish are in F0, F1, F2, F3, F6.5, whatever. That is essentially starting at 0, meaning wild caught. That's how many generations have been, are away from the parents. So, if you have the F0 and they have babies, you would have F1s. And then if those F1s have babies, you'd have F2s and then 3s and then 4s. I'm pretty sure I got that right. And honestly, if I didn't, who cares? It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter that much. Plop and drop is temperature acclimation. It's, you get a bag of fish, you plop it in the tank, you wait a little while, and then you drop the fish out. And then you throw away the bag or whatever. That's probably the most standard acclimation process for freshwater. And acclimation just means essentially getting your new fish or shrimp or snails or plants or whatever you want to do used to their new environment. So yeah, drip acclimation, generally done with an airline tubing and a knot or a valve or something. That's whenever you slowly drip water from your tank into their water. So, yeah, that's drip acclimation. Substrate, I think I already talked about that. That's whatever's at the bottom of your tank. Got a little bit interrupted there. I'm pretty sure I was on breeders, long, and tall/show. Those are kind of types of aquariums. Breeders are generally wider, length and then width. They're wider than whatever the standard size would be on that tank. Like a 40 breeder is, wider than a non-40 breeder, and I think basically all 40 gallons are generally going to be a breeder, a long, or a tall is what people are going to call it. I think honestly a 40 breeder would probably be the most standard size of 40 gallon, so maybe eventually it'll become just a regular 40 gallon. But a long tank is, you guessed it, it's going to be longer than whatever the standard tank is of that size, like a 20 long. It's longer than, there's also highs. Some people call it high, tall, or show. I think show's kind of an older term. My dad calls it show. And he did a lot of fish keeping in the kind of 90s area. So that might be an older term. I like it though. I think we should go back to it because it's generally if you want to sew something off, the taller tank kind of looks better in my opinion. So I think we should go back to show rather than high or long. What do y'all think? I think show sounds cooler. I just like it. But yeah, breeders wide, the others are pretty much self-explanatory. Green water or algae bloom, it's your tank will go green. It'll look like a green color. Some people call it pea soup green or Mountain Dew. That's whenever unicellular, single cell, floating algae gets in your water and makes it green. There's a lot of it. And it turns green. You can fight that with a UV sterilizer or blackouts or just getting your tank. Here's another one I didn't think of. Balancing your tank. That's essentially getting all your light nutrients yeah, honestly, just light nutrients, because CO2 is a nutrient, in balance, so you don't have a bunch of algae, is what that is. A balanced tank, essentially, whenever someone says that, they just are saying they either don't have algae or very much, or they're trying to get rid of it. I guess someone says, I'm trying to balance my tank, what they're saying is, I'm trying to get rid of the algae and keep it gone. Because like you can use like Excel or glutaraldehyde, whatever, to kill it, and that's like a cleaning product essentially. Not going to get into that, but to kill the algae, but it'll just come back. So then people see like, you know, your tank's not balanced. So yeah, bacteria bloom. It's kind of a gray, white type of color. That generally happens whenever your cycle has crashed or about to crash, or you add stuff or whatever. Yeah, that's not necessarily a bad thing, not necessarily a good thing. It will kind of be like a white gray color, and that's a whole bunch of generally beneficial bacteria floating around in your aquarium looking for stuff to grab onto. Because generally the beneficial bacteria that we have, they don't just stay floating around, you know, they stick to stuff. They like to stick to stuff. Someone might say they have cloudy water, and that a lot of the times that's caused by either green water or a bacteria bloom, but sometimes it's not. You know, sometimes, you know, it's just kind of dirty. So you can get rid of that with some polyfill, like we talked about earlier. Pellets, flakes, wafers, granules, crisps, gel food. Okay, I think this is just all the types of food, and I want to talk about it. I think was my strategy here. A pellet is a round thing that's uniform in shape. They come in various sizes. And they can also sink to the bottom. They can sink slowly, so that's good. Sinking fast is good for stuff that eats off the bottom, you know, catfish, that type of thing. Stuff that sinks slowly, good for a lot of the live bears and tetras and all that, kind of like your schooling fish. They generally like a slow sinking food. And floating can also be good for the schooling fish, a lot of them. And that floats on top. It can also be good for like hatchet fish and things that like to eat off the top, you know, upside down catfish, that type of thing. But in all of these, well, not all of these have that, but a lot of them can sink, float, whatever. But pellets are circular or like a sphere and generally fairly uniform in size and shape and all that. But they can come in different sizes, but they're uniform in shape. Flakes are like thin bits of food. They generally float, but you can also put them in the water and they'll kind of sink slowish. Some sink faster, some sink slower. But flakes are like thin little bits, and generally they're kind of big, but you can like break them up and stuff. Wafers are like little disc shaped things, you know, kind of like a frisbee type of shape-ish, and they generally sink to the bottom. Generally people use those for like catfishes and stuff. Granules are essentially a pellet, but they're not uniform in shape. They're like kind of round, but there's like some bumps on them and stuff like that. Crisps are like a flake, but they are very, they're like a circle. They're like, crisp are like pellets, and flakes are like granules. So the flakes, they'll be kind of random shapes, and the crisps, I think Tetra is honestly the only big company that make them. They're like a flake. They generally float, but they're real uniform in shape. So yeah, granules are to pellets as flakes are to crisps. Gel food, generally people are going to be talking about rapashi here. You mix it up and you can put stuff in it and fish like it. Live food is a living thing that you feed to your fish. I think I talked about vinegar eels and microworms earlier. It can also be a fish or a shrimp or anything really, a cocopod. I'm not going to talk about that anymore. Frozen is a once live food that is now frozen. A freeze-dried food is a once live food that is now freeze-dried. So, like the brine shrimp, like baby brine shrimp would be a live food. If you freeze that baby brine shrimp, it'll be a frozen food. If you freeze dry the baby brine shrimp, it would be a freeze-dried food. So, powdered and fry foods are just very fine powders. And they're good for freeing and fried and shrimp and that type of thing. Sticks are, a lot of the times people will say like a shrimp stick, but there's also other sticks. They just kind of look like a stick. Generally they're maybe like an inch long, but it doesn't have to be. But, they're shaped like a stick. They're like a cylinder. There's also like worm-shaped foods like Viber Bites, and I think Extreme has one, and everybody's kind of hopped on that train. They look kind of like a worm. They're like a stick, but more oblong and stuff. So there'd be like a granule, whereas a stick would be like a pellet again. So yeah, there's also like vacation feeders or block feeders. That's basically like a big old chunk of food that doesn't rot very quickly, and you can put it in on vacation or whatever. That's may not be the best choice, but it's a choice. Tablets, generally whenever someone's talking about that, they'd be talking about like a Sarah ONIP tab, and that's generally like, it's like a disc food. It's almost like a wafer, but it sticks to the glass generally. So yeah, and pretty much all those can sink, slow sink, or float. It just kind of depends on the one. Generally blocks and gels are gonna sink. So yeah, and freeze-dried, they generally float on the top, but they can sink too sometimes. Hardscape is the hard things in your tank. Generally people are talking about wood and rocks. They're not referring to the substrate with that generally, but I mean some people probably do. But hardscape, you can think of the wood and the rocks in your tank. Monster fish, some people say they're like a monster fish keeper, and that just means they're keeping real big fish, like like a gar or something. Like they're keeping a gar in their freaking pool outside or something. They're a monster fish keeper. And nano fish keepers are the polar opposite of that. They're keeping like a chili rasbora in a 0.6 gallon tank or something. Not necessarily, I'm not advocating to put chili rasboras in a 0.6 gallon tank. It was just an example. But nano fish is a very small fish. Monster fish, very big fish. There you go. A community tank would be a whole bunch of fish together. Generally of like different species and like families. Like a lot of people wouldn't consider like a whole bunch of African cichlids together, even though they're different genuses and different species and everything, as a community tank necessarily. I mean, some people would, but it's kind of like a gray area. Generally, people are talking like, oh, I have like a Corridora and some tetras and some whatever. And you can also have like monster fish community tanks. Like, you can have like a sturgeon and a gar and, I don't know, a fly river turtle up in there or something. That scenario probably wouldn't work out very good, but if you put them all together, you'd have a community tank. And a species only tank would be, only one species in that tank. Like if you have a puffer fish in there, because it eats everything, you'd have a species only tank. But if you have a nice puffer fish in there that doesn't eat everything, and you have other fish in there, you'd have a community tank. So species only tank is generally there's only one fish in there, but you could also have more than one fish in there. It just kind of depends. It doesn't really matter that much. Like it's really not that big of a deal. Schooling or shoaling, honestly, I don't think anybody keeps enough fish together to really call it a school. It'd really be more of a shoal, but that's kind of splitting hairs. It doesn't really matter. What that means is just like a group of fish. Like if you're, say, oh, that's a schooling fish, or oh, that's a shoaling fish, or whatever, that means they don't necessarily like to be alone. Sometimes it can be better to keep them alone than in like a group, a very small group. And some fish, like, they get so big, you can't really keep them in a big group. So it's best to just keep them alone. So, yeah. Speaking on that, a Noah's Ark or a Noah's Ark tanker, that guy's, he's Noah over there or anything like that. That generally means, it's usually an insult, so sorry. But that means they're like keeping two of everything, which generally isn't a good idea because a lot of the times they'll fight or they will try to breed too much and it'll stress them out, which is essentially fighting, honestly. But it's generally used as an insult, and that's whenever they kind of have two of everything. Like, oh, let me get two of those angelfish and two of those discus and two of those neon tetras and two of those guppies and two of those and two of those and two of those and two of those. That'd be, that person would be Noah. Okay. Collectoritis is generally not used as an insult, and it's whenever you have a whole bunch of things. So it's, like you could be Noah's Ark, but you could have like, let me get like 69 and a half of those and 35 of those, like, or like even like 6 or 8 or whatever. Generally people say, oh yeah, man, that guy has collectoritis. Like I have collectoritis with plant species. Like I have a lot of plant species. Like I don't think I have too much right now. I think I only have like around 100, which is a lot. Like honestly, like I'd say I probably have collectoritis. A small case of it. And I'm sure some of you are like, oh my gosh, that's, it's a big case of it, but, that's whatever. Bottom dwellers, top dwellers, middle dwellers, mid dwellers. That's basically like where the fish hangs out in the tank. Like in the middle fish, a mid-dwelling fish would be like, I don't know, like a tetra or something. A bottom dwelling fish would be like a Corydora, and a top dwelling fish would be like, a hatchet fish. And there's also fish that kind of go everywhere, like guppies, they kind of go everywhere. I think most people would consider them a middle fish, but they kind of go into all the spots, to be honest. But, yeah, whenever someone says like bottom dwellers, or I'm looking for top dwellers, or looking for fish that a bottom dweller would stay at the bottom and a top dweller would stay at the top. All right, ditherfish. I read on here, an active stupid fish that makes more smarter timid fish feel more comfortable and come out. And well, that's essentially what it is. It's an active fish, like, I don't know, like a zebra danio or something. That's going to be, and generally it's smaller than whatever you're trying to get to come out. And, your zebra danio is all swimming around and stuff and feeling great. And, your, I don't know, the pleco or something that won't come out of his cave. That wasn't a great example, but whatever. He'll see that, like a knife fish maybe, that's probably a better one, that doesn't want to come out of his house. He sees that little fish running around up there, and this particular one isn't interested in eating him, and he's like, oh, if that little guy's not getting eaten, I can come out and it's probably safe. So that's a ditherfish. It's just a fish that makes other fish feel more comfortable, essentially. Oddball is generally like a uncommon fish, or it's uncommon. It kind of looks weird, or maybe it's annoying to feed because it only eats live food on a Tuesday afternoon or whatever after a rainstorm. But generally, oddballs are either going to be expensive. They're almost always going to be expensive, And some of them will be annoying to keep, like hard to keep. Some of them won't be. And generally they'll kind of be weird. You know, you could think of them as, well, like an oddball, like a weird little guy. Something that a lot of people don't keep. Water change percentage. I had some guy get confused on this whenever I was talking about something. I don't remember what he thought it was, but it was a valid enough reason that I felt I should include it. What that is, whenever someone says, like, I change 50% of my water every 2 weeks, what they're talking about is, like, visually on the tank, it looks like 50% of the water is gone. Whenever you empty it, you know, you empty it down to whenever, you know, like, say this is your tank right here. Hopefully you can see this good. You know, like right kind of in here would be a 50% water change. So what a water change is you drain out the water and then you fill it back up with new water. So whenever someone talks about the percentage, that's just like visually like, that's about 25% of the tank or 50% or 75 or whatever it's going to be. Bunched, potted, and tissue culture plants. A bunch plants are generally going to be a stem plant, which is, we'll get into that later. And basically what they do is they cut them off and then they sell it to you. That can be a pretty valid way to get plants if, I'll talk about that after this. A potted plant is a plant in a pot, and tissue culture we already talked about. Submersed versus immersed, and there's other ways people like to say it that all mean the same thing. The sub is grown under the water. So the whole plant is grown under the water. The immersed, or whatever else you want to call it, is it's mostly out of the water. Generally just the roots, or maybe like a root. The roots and a little bit of the stem are under the water, but most of the plant is outside of the water. And if you're getting bunch plants especially, that can be really hard. It can be really hard to convert them to being grown, there you go, under the water, because it's just different for the plant. It's a lot easier to have success with plants if you get plants that are grown submerged, and you'll find those a lot of the times at local clubs or like maybe on Etsy. I sell some, so hit me up, I guess. All that information's in the description, so if you want to do that. But immersed plants are, a lot of the times they'll like melt back, which essentially means like the plant's dying. Like my plants are melting, like it means it's kind of dying, but not really. Like it's not really dying, but it also, it kind of is. What it's doing is the growth that's out of the water, it doesn't do stuff under the water very good, as you might be able to expect. So the plant needs to get rid of all that junk and build new that's good for under the water. You could think of it like that, I guess. That could be a topic for a different video, honestly. Yeah. Lead weights on plants. They're not made out of lead. Don't worry about it. Stem, rosette, epiphytes, floating, and carpeting plants. A stem plant, generally, they can be cut pretty much anywhere, and they can grow more. Like if you cut it in half, you have two type of deal, right? They're generally, like a stick. Sometimes we're going to call it like a stick, and it has leaves coming off of that stick. So a rosette, they're generally like some roots and like a crown, you call it, and all the leaves come off of the crown, which is also attached to the roots. So like, say we'll just call this the roots, right? And the crown will be like right here, which is like the parts that connect the leaves and the roots, you could think of it as. So the leaves would all come off of this area. Whereas with the stem, like here's the stem, and like there's a leaf here, and oh my gosh, there's a whole nother stem growing off of this stem. And it has leaves too, and there's leaves and stems and leaves and stems. And you won't have that with rosette plants. Generally, rosette plants, they produce, like with a stem, you just cut them. With rosette plants, they send what people call runners, which is just like a little thing that makes a plant in like a different area. So it's like grass or something. Well, grass would really be more of a stem. But like, I guess it's kind of could be like a rosette. Forget I said anything about grass. So, right, you have one plant here and it's all big, right? Here's our big plant. And it's like, ooh, I'm doing really good. I think I'm going to have a baby. And the baby, it goes under the water, still connected to this big plant. And it's like, I'm going to grow. And then eventually, whenever that baby becomes a big plant, and they'll still be attached, by the way, unless it breaks, or it might honestly break naturally at some point, but I don't know. The baby gets all big, and the big one's still big, and the baby's like, I'm going to have another baby, and it's going to be, I don't know, over here. So, yeah, that's how they produce. Epiphytes are going to, and rosettes are going to be like Amazon swords, crypts, that type of thing. There's others, but beginners probably won't know those. Stems might be like a hornwort, or well, that's really more of a floating plant. Like guppy grass, but it's also a stem. Hornwort's also a stem. It's both. But it doesn't really fit great into either category, to be honest. Stems are generally going to root in the substrate, although not all the time like with hornwort. But stems like Rhotalis, Lewigias, guppy grass, nodule grasses, what's some more? AR, we talked about that. I'm not sure why I can't think of any others. Lemon, whatever. There's a whole lot of stems. Rosettes, swords, crypts, that type of thing. Epiphytes, Java fern, Anubias, Bulbitis, Bucephalandra. Those are the main ones. They don't like rosette plants, like with the crown, they don't really care that much if it's in the substrate or not. They prefer it out, but they can live with it in. But epiphytes, they have what's called a rhizome, and that's like the ugly thing on the bottom of the plant, basically. It kind of looks like a worm or something. But that thing can't be under the substrate for a long period of time or it's going to die. Epiphytes, they generally like to be kind of like maybe put on a piece of wood or a rock. I just kind of like to put them at the bottom and let them root themselves, but make sure not to push that rhizome in. So really it's better to put them on wood or rocks or whatever. Or just let them float around. That works too. Floating plants like duckweed, water lettuce, Amazon frogbit, various salvinia species, a whole lot of others. They float on the top of the water. Generally, that's what people are talking about whenever they refer to floating plants. They float on the top, and they would be considered an immersed plant because, some of it's in the water and some of it's out. But, we're moving on from that. Not sure where I was going with that one. But floating plants, they like to float on the top. They generally produce, like rosette plants, they like to send off little runners, and yeah. A carpeting plant is a foreground plant that grows real fast. That's what it is. And it doesn't have to grow real fast, but generally it does. And really a carpeting plant, It's just a foreground plant that makes babies. Like, I mean, that's all it really is. And it stays low, and it kind of creates like a carpet look. Like, you know, like in this room, there's carpet on the floor. And in your aquarium, if you have a carpet, you know, there'd be a whole lot of plants on the bottom. So, and generally they stay small. So that's, why it's like a carpet. So, yeah. Foreground plants, midground plants, and background plants is basically how big they get. A foreground plant stays real small, a midground plant is a little bigger, and a background plant is real tall. So it's like where you would put it in the aquarium to see it the best. So like if you put like a foreground plant in the back and a background plant up in the front, you can't see this foreground plant because it's blocked by the background plant. So hopefully that made sense. Aerial roots, generally people are referring to this on stem plants, but really it's any plant. All it is a root that's not in the substrate. It's in the air or the water in this case, but that's what an aerial root is. Yeah, it's nothing to worry about. It's just kind of something plants do. It doesn't really mean much. Like some people get freaked out, but it's nothing to worry about. You can cut it off if you don't like it. Or you could cut the stem and plant it, but whatever. Because again, you would have two if you did that. So, whatever. Water conditioner, dechlorinator, or prime. That's stuff that takes chlorine out of the water. Chlorine, no good for fish. Water conditioner, dechlorinator, they're the same thing. Prime is a brand made by Seachem. It's Seachem would be the brand. Prime is a product of Seachem. So there you go. It's one of the more popular ones. Somebody might say, did you add prime? All my fish are dead after I did a water change. Somebody say, did you add prime? And what they mean is, did you add a water conditioner or a dechlorinator? And you need to use those pretty much most of the time, unless you don't. Okay, you need to use them. If you're not sure if you should use them or not, you should use them. So, yeah. Fish in or fishless or fish out cycling, as some people might call it. Fish in cycling is cycling the tank, which we talked about earlier, I hope, with the fish in it. Right? So you would need to do more water changes if you're doing a fish in cycle. And fishless cycling is cycling the tank without fish in it. Okay? And there's lots of ways to do that. You could just get a whole bunch of plants growing. So whenever you add the fish, all the waste the fish would produce would be ate up by the plants. So that would work. Or you could add ammonia to get your beneficial bacteria going. Or you could do a whole lot of things, right? But fish in or versus fishless, that's just whether you have fish in the tank whenever you're cycling it. Okay, dark start is cycling the tank with the lights off. A lot of people use that with aqua soils because they're an active substrate, and some of them produce, well, they don't produce, but they release a whole lot of crap in the water that algae uses. And generally a non-cycled tank has a tendency to get more algae than a cycled tank because a cycled tank is going to be more established. All right, that's where I'm leaving that one. But dark start is cycling the tank with the lights off, at least for a period of time, right? You don't have to complete the cycle with the lights off, but you have to have them off for a period of time at the start. A dry start has nothing to do with cycling your tank, but It also kind of does. A dry start is whenever you put all the plants in your tank without any water up in there. So, plants grow faster whenever they have a whole lot of CO2, and there's a whole lot of CO2 in the air, but not a lot in the water. So, you're growing the plants immersed, which we talked about earlier, in the aquarium to get them to fill out faster. But, kind of the issue with that is they're immersed plants and they melt back. So, there's that. And you still have to cycle your tank, right? Because a lot of the plants are going to melt back. And they'll come back faster because they have like the roots and stuff if you did it right. But to me, it's just more trouble than it's worth. Like, I'd rather kind of do everything at the same time. Like, and that's what some people call it, cycling your tank with plants. I don't know why I did so many quotes there, but whatever. Air quotes there. I got the hiccups. But whatever. And what that is basically you set up your aquarium, you fill it with water, you put a bunch of plants in it, you let them grow till you feel good about it, generally a couple months or something, and then you slowly add fish to it. So that'd be like a plant cycle. So yeah, and maybe I'll talk more about cycling and stuff later, but whatever. Plants melting or dying back, I already talked about that, but generally that happens whenever their immersed growth is going from immersed to submersed. So the plant's been growing out of water, and then you put it underwater, and it's like, oh, this is terrible. I gotta build back better, right? That's what the plant's doing. He's building back better. And that can also happen. Crypts have a real tendency to do this whenever your water parameters change. So let's say your pH went from 8 to, 7 for whatever reason. And your plants are like, hey, I can't be having this. I need to die because I'm angry, and then I need to rebuild myself. So yeah, basically the plant gets mad. I like to think of it like that. The plant gets mad and it goes on a hunger strike for a while, and it kind of starts to die because it's on a hunger strike. And then the plant's like, well, actually I don't want to die, and I guess this is my new life now, so I'm going to start eating again. So that probably wasn't a good analogy there, but that's the one I made. So we're moving on from that one. Going back to live foods for some reason. A starter versus a culture. A starter is a small amount of a culture that you can build up to be a full-fledged culture. And a culture, you would feed your fish out of a culture. So starter is basically what it sounds like. It kind of starts you out. It, is the animal or bacteria or whatever you're doing. It is the thing, and you're going to grow it to be a whole bunch of them. And whenever you have a whole bunch of them, you would have a culture. And you could feed your fish from the culture or do whatever you're going to do with it. Flow. Generally, people, whenever they say flow, a lot of the times, all the time, they're saying how much is the water moving in your tank. Like generally kind of like in the middle and at the bottom, not at the top, right? So the flow would be like, it's how much the water is moving around inside your aquarium. And surface agitation, oxygen exchange, and a lot of people would just call it water movement too, or water movement at the surface or something like that. That's how much your water is moving at the top of your aquarium where the air is. And theoretically, the more you have of the water moving at the top, splashing and ripples and whatnot. The more oxygen could, like I said, theoretically, dissolve in your aquarium water and get moved around by your flow, so your fish can breathe. Yeah, I think that's all I want to say about that. So the surface agitation, oxygen exchange, water movement at the surface. Sometimes people just call it water movement. It goes by many names. It's kind of like a gauge of how much oxygen is in your aquarium. Almost is kind of what people use it like. You could think of, I guess. Spawning, breeding, and fry. Fish spawning is like them mating. Like they're making more of themselves, and so that's what spawning is. And fry would be like the babies, and breeding would be the same thing as spawning. But generally, whenever people use breeding in the aquarium hobby, at least in my experience, they're referring to themselves as a fish breeder. Like they're, like allowing the fish to make more. They're setting up an environment that they want to spawn. So they're a breeder, if that makes sense. Okay. I guess I was on the breeding train and I wanted to go on a little bit of a rant here. Talking about master breeder and, like master horticulture awards and expert and novice and all that stuff. Right? Generally, and this is all to my knowledge, all they are is an award given out by a club, and there's no like governing body to decide requirements. It's just like that local club, and honestly, they're way too easy to obtain. To use it as really any of a gauge's skill. Like I think a lot of the times they're too easy to obtain to be like, that guy knows what he's talking about. Like he'll probably kind of know what he's talking about and could probably help a beginner. But if you're, more advanced, kept tanks, a long time, he may not be too helpful. I mean, in that, but the thing is that strictly depends on whatever your club made the requirements to be. Like some of the clubs, they're pretty stringent upon those requirements, but most of them, like 99%, they're not. Like what they call a master would really be like an apprentice or something, in my opinion. Like they just make it too easy a lot of the times. But yeah, I mean, I think that's all I really want to talk about that. But yeah, I guess my point is, don't put all your faith into a title that is almost essentially made up. Right? I mean, I'm not sure what that noise is or if y'all can hear that. It sounds like TV is on or something, but it's not. Maybe it's like downstairs or something, but I guess my point is clubs need to make their master breeder in horticulture and whatever awards to be like an actual master in the subject, which it's not. Okay, I guess I really got on fish breeding here. Live bearer, if they say their fish is a live bearer, that's a fish that bears live young, like most mammals. Like a human, like your baby comes out alive, he's not in an egg. Scatterers are, they lay eggs and they just kind of throw them everywhere. An egg layer, or sometimes called like an egg, I can't think of it right now, but they put their eggs in one spot and they take care of them like, I don't know, do rabbits lay eggs? I don't think they do. Like a penguin. There we go. Like a bird. An egg layer would be like a bird. They lay the eggs all in one spot, and a lot of the times they'll kind of guard them. If they're good parents, they'll guard the eggs and kind of protect them. So that would be an egg layer. A mouth brooder they hold the. I'm not sure if they hold the eggs or like the fry in their mouth, like the baby fish. I don't think I've ever had one, so I'm not sure. But they hold whatever it is in their mouth for like protection. Bubble nesters, they build a nest like a bird, whereas egg layers, they just kind of pick a good spot in the ground like a stupid bird. But a bubble nester, they build like an actual home for them, Like bettas do this a lot. I guess I'll back up. Live bears, guppies, mollies, that type of thing. Egg scatters, white cloud mountain minnows, tetras, a lot of the small schooling fish that are, for lack of a better word, stupid. The egg layers, a lot of the cichlids will do that. Mouth brooders, a lot of the African cichlids will do that, as well as some bettas, I believe. I'm certain some bettas do that. Bubble nesters, a lot of the bettas do it. Gouramis do it too. I think most of the labyrinth fish do that. And the labyrinth fish, I think I'm saying that right, it's kind of like a lung. You could think of it like that. And they'll build bubble nesters and egg barriers. A lot of the killifish will do this. And a lot of the fish and things that live in ventral pools, I believe is the name of them. Like puddles essentially that go away, in different parts of the year. Or maybe they'll be there for a year and then they go away. An egg barrier will bury their eggs so they stay wet. Shell dwellers, or shellies, are 3 species, I believe, of African cichlids. And they hang out in shells, like snail shells and stuff, like big ones. They're kind of big, but not huge. They're like, I don't know, somewhere in there. A few inches long. There we go. They'll sometimes be called shellies, and they like to hang out in shells. Protein film is that shiny rainbow type of thing. Kind of looks like an oil slick. Some people call it an oil slick on the top of your aquarium. You can get rid of that with more surface agitation or oxygen exchange or water movement that we talked about earlier. So there we go. A cap. It's generally used on dirty tanks, or as some people might say, a Father Fish Method tank or a Wallstad tank. And what it is it's usually a sand. It's some sort of inert or non-active substrate that goes over dirt usually. It could also go over really any active substrate, like you could put it over an aqua soil if you wanted to. That would mainly be for aesthetic purposes, but dirt tends to release a whole lot more stuff into the water as compared to an aqua soil. And you want all that stuff to stay at the bottom, so the roots of the plants or whatever can use it. So you'll put sand or a whole bunch of gravel or whatever you want really on top of it to keep it locked in there. So that's what a cap is. A cap is either a useful or a decorative inert substrate on top of an active substrate is what I'm going to call it here. A filler or a binder, you'll hear this in generally whenever you're talking about commercial foods, like your pellets, your granules, most of those things that we talked about there that aren't live, frozen, freeze-dried, or I guess gel. A lot of them will have binders, which are generally not super useful for the fish, like digestively, like it doesn't make the fish grow, but it does hold the food together, which is very important. It binds the food together. Filler is generally kind of more of a negative connotation to a binder. So, but generally they're the same thing. Like if a commercial food has excess binder, you might call that a filler. Something like that. You'll hear this, the insert type of fish here police, like the betta police or just the fish police in general, or the gourami police or the turtle police or whatever police. There are people that I enjoy what I wrote here, but that's not the nicest thing. There are people that are generally they're coming from a good place, but they can be kind of mean and not always the most accurate. But what they're doing a lot of the times is they're trying to ensure the best possible life for the animal that they love, even if it's not their animal. Okay, so like if you have like a betta or something in, I don't know, like a 3-gallon, let's say, as opposed to the 5-gallon, which is kind of the societal norm, I'll say. The betta police will bust your butt because you're abusing that fish, and they'll make you cry and all that stuff. So, generally they're just kind of people who get on to you, I'll say, if you're not doing it, if you're not keeping fish in a way they feel like you should. Sure. Here we go. This could also turn into a rant. Low light, medium light, and high light. What that is I'm just going to read what I put because I kind of like it. It's a measurement for light based on vibes. There's no common, there's no societal collective cutoffs for what is medium, low, and high. Some people say, highlight is 200 part the substrate. Other people say, like Aquarium Co-op, I think they say it's 40 part the substrate. Which, I kind of feel it's an ever-changing thing. Like as lights get brighter over time and, LEDs get better and whatever else we're going to use in the future gets better. I think that goalpost of highlight needs to change with that. And really, I think there needs to be more than medium, low, and high. Because, that's not... I feel like that's not really enough to get a good grasp of how well your plants will do in a given light situation and how good they'll look and all that. And the fact that there's no accepted par or lumen or whatever you want it to be amount for those things is not helpful either. But yeah, low, medium, high, it's just kind of like how bright your tank is. Like how you feel how bright your tank is, I guess you could say. Because like there's no real cutoffs, kind of like with the Master Breeder Awards and Horticulture Award programs. Like there's no real like, okay, this is how it is, you know. And yeah. Python, or some people call it a siphon, which is weird because it's Python is a brand. Yeah, what a Python, or some people call it siphon, or a water changing tube, whatever it is people are wanting to call it these days. It's a way to change water that is basically a long hose that, like, you could use a garden hose too, honestly, that you drain and refill your aquarium with. That's all it is. And they're nice because you don't have to use the bucket method, which is up next. And that's using a bucket. Generally, a 5-gallon is kind of the standard there to drain and refill your tanks during water changes. Both of these are for water changes, which I talked about earlier. Yeah, the bucket method is you take a bucket, you fill it with however much it'll hold, you dump it out, you do more or less or whatever until you get to whatever percentage you wanted. We talked about that earlier. And then you get fresh water from your tap or wherever you get your fresh water to put in, and you fill it back up using buckets. And whereas with a Python or a siphon, you use a long hose to do that. So yeah. Filter gravy. What that is all the crap that's in your filter. You know, like, you don't clean it a while and it's real dirty. That's filter gravy. And the reason people call it filter gravy, because gravy's good, and filter gravy is also good. It can be hold a lot of beneficial bacteria and other things to kind of help you get established tank kind of going faster. Let's call it that. But it's just all the stuff that's in a used filter that hasn't been cleaned in a while, and then it can help kind of jumpstart the cycle and stuff in new aquariums. An established media or an established filter is a filter or filter media, which is the stuff that goes inside of the filter, that's been on a cycled tank for a period of time to have enough beneficial bacteria on it that you could put it in a new tank and call it a cycled tank. So that's what that is. Yeah, that's kind of two different techniques to kind of have like an immediate cycle, is to either use filter gravy, so clean out your old filter into your new one, or you can actually put the new, the actual media or the whole filter from your old tank onto your new tank. And you can also have two filters running at the same time. And that's generally the standard way to do it. But you could also, a lot of the times, I'll take like half of the used filter media and put it in a new one, and then replace, both of it with new filter media, because beneficial bacteria grows really fast. I mean, I think that's all I'm going to talk about with that. Bottled bacteria is theoretically what it is a beneficial bacteria that's put into a bottle, and then it's sold, and the idea is that it stays alive and it's the correct bacteria and all that to help you jumpstart your cycle in a new aquarium, just like established media or filter gravy would. Generally, that bottled bacteria is used whenever you're setting up your first aquarium, for kind of obvious reasons, because otherwise you could just use some established media or filter gravy to do the same thing, but probably better. Dry weight is just the weight of your aquarium with nothing in it, so like just the glass box. Glass box, like I said, glass box. Some people say, I keep glass boxes, whatever. They keep aquariums. I guess I'm talking about automatic stuff, automatic water changes. Whenever someone says they have that, their water changes are completed automatically, so they don't have to use a Python or the bucket method. They have their own system that they don't have to do anything, and it just does it. An auto top off, right? So your water evaporates. Like, let's say this is the top and your water level was here, but it's been a week and now it's here, and it looks bad because your water level's all low. You might need to top the tank off with new water if it's not time to do your water change, which kind of has some pros and cons there, but I don't want to discuss that in this video. That's not what this is supposed to be about, although it kind of has become that. I might have to shoot this again. But yeah, that topping off is whenever your water level gets low and you fill it back up. And an auto top off would be doing the same thing, but you don't have to do anything. Auto dosing for like fertilizers or whatever people are dosing in their tanks. Saltwater people like to do fancy stuff, but us freshwater guys, generally just using fertilizer for plants. In auto doser, you wouldn't have to pump fertilizer in or pour fertilizer in or whatever. You'd have a machine. All these are a machine that does it for you automatically. In auto feeder, you don't have to feed your fish. You have a thingy that does it automatically. In auto timer, it's just a regular timer. You don't have to turn your light off. You have a timer that does it, that type of thing. Gasping fish, whenever someone says that, it means, the fish are at the surface of the water and they're like opening their mouth and they're like kind of like breathing, kind of. Generally, that's not a good thing. Generally, there's something wrong with your water and you need to fix your stuff. You might do a water change or something else. Water changes aren't always the answer there, but you need to do something. If you have gasping fish, jumpers are fish that like to jump out of the tank. Bettas, baddis, they're kind of notorious for that. So they would be jumpers. They like to jump out of the tank. Ecosystem tanks, natural tanks, Wallstad tanks, filterless tanks, father fish method tanks. They're all kind of the same thing, but also not really. I think we kind of talked about the father fish earlier, about that. But and generally the father fish filter doesn't have a powered filter, so it's not going to have a sponge filter. It's not going to have a hang on the back and a canister, whatever. It's not going to have that either. But ecosystem, natural, Wallstad, filterless, father fish, all those things. Whole lot of names for it, and generally what people are talking about there is an aquarium that's set up in again, not all these are the exact same thing, but they're all the same enough that I'm going to call it the same thing for this video. It's an aquarium that's set up in a way allowing for less and or no water changes, which I don't know about all that, and less or no food, generally with no powered filtration. A filterless aquarium is not going to have any powered filtration, but like a natural style tank might, an ecosystem tank might, but like allowing for the less food. Generally there's very few fish in these, kind of obviously, and a whole bunch of plants, and there might be like some cocopods or scuds or whatever that your fish can eat, so they won't die. Gut loading, this is kind of a thing for predator fish, and you're feeding a live food, which we talked about earlier. It's a food you're feeding a fish that's alive, and you're feeding it generally a commercially prepared food for vitamins for your big fish, and you're doing that like right before you feed it to the big fish. That way the big fish can get the vitamins too. Is kind of the idea behind that. Yeah, so gut loading, what you're doing is you're feeding a live food what you want your predator to eat if it wasn't so annoying. That's how I think of it. RPP is an aquarium co-op thing. That's their retail partner program. That's essentially aquarium co-op wholesaling to local fish stores. That's what that is. You might also hear like aquarium co-op called the co-op or just coop or something like that. They're referring to aquarium co-op, which is a very popular online and physical fish store is all that is, and wholesaler now too. They do it all, folks. Fish and plants for profit is a futile attempt to sell fish, plants, or inverts or whatever, live foods, you create in your aquarium for a sustained profit. Speaking of which, I now have an Etsy shop, so you should help me do plants for profit and buy my plants. You could also contact me on Facebook to get them for cheaper, because Etsy, there's a lot of fees there. So I have to sell them for more money so I don't lose money. So, yeah. But, if you don't like to talk to people, contact me or buy it on Etsy. And then you won't have to talk to my beautiful face.